The NBA is one of the most narrative-driven leagues in professional sports, and especially with the way that it's covered by the media, those narratives can often drive the perception of a player to be much higher or lower than it should actually be. This ties directly into the topic of today's video and tomorrow's video, where I will be going through every NBA team, identifying the most overrated player on each roster. In this video, we'll be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, then tomorrow's video, we will be going through the teams in the Western Conference, so stay tuned for that as well. Of course, this is a topic that's inherently controversial, and I know due to the nature of the topic, some of the selections are going to upset some of you, but please at least hear me out on the reasoning for why I feel how I do about each selection before leaving multiple paragraph-long comments down below filled with anger. Before we start though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. PrizePicks is the perfect service for all of us basketball fans here because when you're involved, it makes watching basketball games every night so much more fun and engaging. Basically, it's an application that provides you with lines on all kinds of individual player props, such as points, rebounds, assists, three-pointers made amongst others, and you simply have to choose whether you believe they will record over the set amount in the line or under the set amount in the line. Make your selections, wager however much you want to, and if your picks hit, you can win some big money. For some picks that I'm looking at making for today's slate of games, I'm thinking of going with Kyrie Irving to score over 25.5 points, James Harden to score over 22.5 points, and Jalen Green to make over 1.5 threes. If this sounds at all intriguing to you, then go use the link down in the description of the video to sign up today, and use promo code REFERENCE to receive a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Once again, thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. Going in alphabetical order by team, we'll start with the Atlanta Hawks, and the player that I believe is the most overrated for them is John Collins. Collins and the Hawks made a lot of noise in the postseason last year, but they haven't been able to translate that momentum into this season. Collins' numbers are down across the board, and while he still ranks as one of the best role men in the pick and roll, he comes in below league average according to Synergy Sports in terms of spot-up shooting and post-up scoring, so even though he's been vocal about wanting to be more involved in the offense, having it more run through him, I'm not so sure he's actually worthy of that and should probably continue to embrace the role that he's in. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and the most overrated player on their team right now is probably Marcus Smart. Smart, for years, has been the kind of role player that it's easy for a fan base to fall in love with, but it now feels as though Smart is getting by more on his reputation than his production. The Celtics are one of the hottest teams in the NBA at the moment in the second half of the season, and their defense is a big reason why, so in the media there have been a few calls for Marcus Smart to get some Defensive Player of the Year consideration, when in actuality, I think it should easily be argued that Robert Williams has been the biggest key to their defensive success, so in that regard, Smart may have become a bit overrated. The next team up is the Brooklyn Nets, and their most overrated player right now is Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons went from being one of the most slandered athletes in the NBA to immediately being one of the most coddled athletes in the league after getting traded, which was kind of predictable, but now he's become incredibly overrated as a result of it. His production shrinks in the playoffs every year, he might not even play this season with all of the delays he's experiencing trying to ramp up his conditioning, and yet after getting traded, he's now being pegged as the guy that will put the Nets over the top as the favorites in the East. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and their most overrated player is honestly LaMelo Ball. I say this as a huge LaMelo Ball fan, but I do feel as though his All-Star nomination this season was a bit premature. He does have very strong production, and by all means he's such an exciting playmaker that makes the game look fun, but he's a pretty poor defender still, and he gets benched in crunch time every now and then because his coach doesn't fully trust him with the decision-making that he has in key moments. Next up is the Chicago Bulls, and their most overrated player right now is Nikola Vucevic. When discussing the Bulls, everyone always says how they've compiled so much all-star quote-unquote talent with Vooch included in that grouping, along with DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine, but the truth is that Vucevic's all-star days are definitely behind him. He's a marginally better defender right now, but offensively his shot has fallen off a cliff, and he's been frustrating Bulls fans all season long. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the most overrated player on this team right now is Caris LeVert. LeVert, dating back to his time with the Pacers, has always been viewed by most as a promising young player with potential, but he's literally 27 years old right now. What he is right at this moment is what he will be, and that's an inefficient shot creator who provides some secondary playmaking ability at a solid rate, but that's what it is for now, and it probably will remain that way. He gets by with this narrative because his game is aesthetically pleasing, but the reality of his output is well below how he is perceived. Up next, we have the Detroit Pistons, and their most overrated player right now is Jeremy Grant. Grant went to Detroit for the sole purpose of being in a number one option role offensively, and as a result, his production across the board has shot up over the last 2 years. Objectively, he has shown that he can be more than just a 3-and-D guy like he was being used as in Oklahoma City and Denver previously, but at the same time, his production isn't exactly efficient, and a team is not going to be winning many games with him in this big of a role either. Next up is the Indiana Pacers, and their most overrated player right now is Malcolm Brogdon. There was a time when Brogdon was linked to Ben Simmons in trade rumors, and people were saying that he was more than enough value to get back for him in a trade. But he's really just a good, not great player that does a bunch of things decently well out on the court without really excelling at any one thing. Next up is the Miami Heat, and their most overrated player right now is Jimmy Butler. Butler, quite frankly, gets way too much credit for the success of the Miami Heat right now when his supporting cast has actually proven to be at the heart of a lot of it, and the coaching they get from Spoelstra is top-notch. Over the last 2 months, Jimmy is shooting just 9% from 3, and on the season as a whole, he's only making 18% of his threes, and his jumper has just been completely broken, and Tyler Hero has been far more effective closing games for the Heat, despite Jimmy Butler having the reputation as their closer. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their most overrated player is Khris Middleton. Middleton's nomination to the All-Star game this year is the reasoning behind his selection, because even though he has been having a solid season overall objectively, there were simply more deserving players that got snubbed from the game in favor of him, such as Pascal Siakam and Jarrett Allen, even though Allen did eventually get selected as an injury replacement. Up next is the New York Knicks, and their most overrated player right now is Cam Reddish. Reddish is a young player that still has a long way to go before he develops into someone who can consistently produce in a rotation, and while I can admit that he hasn't always been given a fair shot at doing so, especially in his time with the Knicks since they traded for him, eventually you have to ask yourself why that is and stop blaming everyone else around him and start looking at him. Up next is the Orlando Magic, and their most overrated player is Bol Bol. I'll admit that I have previously played into the Bol Bol hype, but just like Cam Reddish, we have to be honest with ourselves regarding why he struggles to get consistent chances at minutes. Bol's skill set as a 7'2" player that can shoot it so effortlessly is definitely intriguing, but he's pretty slow-footed, and there have been rumors floating around that he's not exactly a hard worker, so it's tough to cape for that. Next up is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their most overrated player is Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris's numbers trick a lot of the casual audience because he has some pretty bad habits in his game. He's an incredibly slow decision maker, which then results in him overthinking things when he's doing too much out on the court. His shot selection is frustrating at times with the max contract too. He's getting paid way more than he's done to earn it. Next up is the Toronto Raptors, and their most overrated player is Precious Achiuwa. Now on this whole list, this one's definitely one of the biggest nitpicks because looking through their team, there isn't really anyone that sticks out as overrated. Achiuwa, however, is one of the least efficient big men in the league this season and has had plenty of ups and downs throughout the year, so he becomes the choice kind of by default. And finally, the last team in the Eastern Conference is the Washington Wizards, and their most overrated player is Bradley Beal. Beal has been basically holding the Wizards hostage lately as there are constant trade rumors surrounding his name, yet he continues to wait it out until they pay him the Supermax contract this summer that I really don't think he deserves after the season that he's been having. We all know he's just going to request a trade shortly after he gets paid this contract, so it's obvious and when that happens, people are inevitably going to value him much higher than he's proven to be. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below who you think are some of the most overrated players in the Eastern Conference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.